Ancient sailors crossed oceans long before maps showed the way. Their journeys connected distant worlds, weaving a hidden network that shaped our history. This is the story of 30 ancient ports, the vital hubs where that global web was spun. By the end, you will see the ancient world not as isolated kingdoms, but as a surprisingly connected and sophisticated marketplace. How did a dock in India influence empires in the Middle East? What forgotten city served as a meeting point for cultures from Rome to China? These were not simple harbors. They were cosmopolitan crossroads where languages mixed, religions spread, and fortunes were made. Goods like silk, spices, and ideas flowed through them, changing civilizations forever. What does our modern world of trade and travel owe to these forgotten gateways? One of these forgotten gateways lies buried in the soil of modern Gujarat. Around 2,400 years before the Common Era, when many human societies were just beginning to settle, the people of the Indus Valley built something remarkable. Their city of Lothal was not just a settlement, it was a masterfully planned port. At its heart, engineers constructed a massive brick-lined basin, a sheltered harbor connected to the nearby river. But this was no simple canal. They designed a sophisticated tidal lock gate system, a wooden barrier that could be opened and closed with the rhythm of the sea. This brilliant innovation managed water levels, keeping their ships afloat even when the tide went out, and preventing the harbor from silting up. It was a feat of hydraulic engineering that would not be seen again for thousands of years. Lothal was a bustling hub of industry and long-distance trade. Artisans there worked carnelian into beautiful beads, crafted ivory, and wove cotton, a fabric so rare and luxurious it was almost mythical to people elsewhere. These goods did not stay local. From this engineered dock, laden ships sailed westward across the Arabian Sea, reaching the great cities of Mesopotamia. In return, goods and ideas flowed back. The dock at Lothal is more than an ancient ruin, it is a profound statement. It tells us that the ambition to reach across open water, to connect and trade, is one of humanity's oldest and most powerful drives. This was not a random landing spot. It was a calculated, brilliantly built machine for commerce, a testament to a civilization that thought on a global scale long before the word global had any meaning. The ambition to build and connect, so clear at Lothal, found another powerful expression far to the west. While Lothal's dock was a feat of engineering, another port's legacy is woven into the very words we use to record history. Nestled on the coast of what is now Lebanon, the city of Byblos has been a living port for over 5,000 years, a gateway that never truly closed. Its story is not just about trade, but about how trade can transform culture itself. The Phoenician merchants of Byblos were masters of the Mediterranean, and their most famous export was the magnificent cedar wood from the mountains behind their city. This timber was not ordinary lumber. It was strong, fragrant, and resistant to rot, making it the perfect material for shipbuilding and grand construction. The ancient Egyptians, whose own land lacked such forests, prized this cedar above almost all else. They traded gold, papyrus, and other treasures for it, using the long, straight trunks to build their sacred funeral barges and the towering masts of their own vessels. This trade route was so vital that Byblos became an essential partner to Egyptian civilization, a supplier of the physical material that allowed another culture to reach for the heavens and sail the seas. But Byblos traded in more than wood. It became the primary Mediterranean port for receiving another Egyptian treasure, papyrus, the ancient world's paper. So much of this material flowed through the city's warehouses that its name, Byblos, became the Greek word for book. That word journeyed further, giving us the name for the most influential book in Western history, the Bible. This is a profound example of cultural exchange, a port's identity becoming forever linked with the written word, and the Phoenicians of Byblos contributed their own world-changing innovation to writing. They developed a simplified alphabet of just 22 characters, a system far easier to learn than the complex pictograms of Egypt or Mesopotamia. This revolutionary script did not stay in one place. It traveled on those Cedar ships adopted and adapted by the Greeks, who added vowels and then passed on to the Romans. The letters you are reading right now can trace a lineage back to the merchants and scribes of this ancient Lebanese port. So Byblos stands as a dual cradle, providing both the material for construction and the very tools for recording thought. It reminds us that the most enduring exports of a great trading hub are often not the goods in its holds, but the ideas in its wake. The revolutionary alphabet from Byblos found one of its earliest and most cosmopolitan homes in another great northern port. Ugarit, on the coast of what is now Syria, was not just a trading post, it was the diplomatic and communications nerve center of the entire Bronze Age world. For over 2 centuries, from around 1450 to 1200 before the Common Era, this city thrived at the precise intersection of 4 colossal powers. To the south lay the gold-rich kingdom of Egypt, to the north the mighty Hittite Empire with its iron-working secrets, to the east the ancient city-states of Mesopotamia. And across the sea to the west, the rising cultures of the Aegean, like the Mycenaeans. Ugarit's genius was in connecting them all. Its docks were constantly filled with ships carrying copper from Cyprus, ivory from Africa, fine pottery from Greece, and precious tin, a vital component for making bronze from distant sources possibly as far away as Afghanistan. But the most profound discovery in its ruins was not a treasure of gold or a cache of spices. It was a library. Archaeologists found thousands of clay tablets inscribed in a dizzying array of languages and scripts, including Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the age, Hittite, Hurrian, and even Cypro-Minoan from Cyprus. Among these was something extraordinary, the Ugaritic alphabet. Using just 30 cuneiform signs, this was one of the earliest known alphabetic systems, a streamlined tool for record-keeping that operated alongside the more complex scripts of its powerful neighbors. This made Ugarit an information hub, a place where treaties were negotiated, contracts were sealed, and news from across the known world was gathered, translated, and stored. The city was a brilliant proof that interconnectedness could bring stability and prosperity, a delicate web of mutual interest that held empires together. And then, with shocking speed, it all vanished. Around 1200 before the Common Era, Ugarit was completely and violently destroyed, burned to the ground, and never reoccupied. Its fate was part of a much wider catastrophe historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, a perfect storm of invasion, migration, climate shifts, and the breakdown of trade that saw every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East fall into ruin within a generation. The silence that followed is haunting. The flow of tin ceased, paralyzing bronze production. The diplomatic letters stopped. The vibrant network Ugarit helped sustain simply ceased to exist. Its story is a powerful reminder of both the strength and the stunning fragility of these first global connections. A single port could be the linchpin of an age, and its fall could help unravel an entire world. The silence that followed Ugarit's fall did not last forever. Across the sea, on the island of Crete, another maritime power had already been building its own network for centuries, one that would leave a very different kind of legacy. Its story begins not with clay tablets, but with graceful frescoes and the deep, rhythmic sound of stone meeting water. On the southern coast of Crete, archaeologists uncovered the port of Kommos, a sprawling harbor complex that served as the principal gateway for the magnificent palace at Phaistos. This was the maritime heartbeat of the Minoan civilization, a people whose name is forever linked with the sea. the evidence at Kommos is physical and profound. Scattered across the site are enormous stone anchors, some weighing hundreds of pounds, each with a carefully carved hole for a rope. These are not the small weights of coastal fishermen. They are the tools of deep-sea voyagers, ships sturdy enough to carry cargo and crew across the open Mediterranean. And what cargo it was! The soil of Kommos is filled with fragments of pottery that tell a map of ancient trade. There is fine Egyptian alabaster, ornate vases from Cyprus, and distinctive jars from the distant ports of the Levant. Each broken piece is a receipt, a proof of purchase from a world that was already intimately connected long before the classical age. This steady flow of goods was the lifeblood of Minoan culture. It brought in the raw materials for their legendary artisans, who created those breathtaking frescoes of leaping dolphins and elegant courtiers. It supplied the wealth that built their sprawling, labyrinthine palaces without defensive walls, a stunning sign of confidence in their command of the seas. Historians call this a thalassocracy, a sea empire, but it was likely less about military domination and more about commercial and cultural influence radiating from ports like Kommos. The harbor's story did not end with the Minoans. Centuries later, after shifts in power and perhaps natural events, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece took control of Crete. They too used Kommos, adding their own distinctive pottery to the archaeological layers. And later still, intrepid Phoenician merchants, the successors to the traders of Byblos, established a small sanctuary there, leaving behind artifacts that speak of their long-distance voyages. This layered history makes Kommos a unique archive. It is not the story of a single culture's rise and fall, but a testament to a prime location's enduring value. For over 1,000 years, from the Minoans to the Phoenicians, different civilizations recognized this same sheltered bay as the perfect place to connect, to unload, and to set sail again. The stone anchors resting there are silent witnesses to a simple, enduring truth that the sea does not belong to any one people. It is a highway that successive generations learn to travel. That layered history at Kommos shows how a single harbor can serve many masters across the ages. But some ancient trade partners remained forever just out of reach, their locations a tantalizing mystery. For the civilization of ancient Egypt, no destination held more allure than the land of Punt. This was not merely a foreign port, it was a realm of legend, a source of unimaginable wealth and divine favor. From at least 2,500 years before the Common Era, Egyptian pharaohs organized great maritime expeditions south, down the Red Sea, to reach this fabled place. The voyages themselves were monumental undertakings, requiring the construction of special seagoing ships on the Nile, their disassembly, a grueling overland trek across the desert to the Red Sea coast, and their reassembly before the dangerous open-water journey could even begin. So what made this perilous effort worthwhile? The treasures of Punt were unlike anything in Egypt itself. Egyptian temple reliefs, carved with meticulous detail, show the returning ships laden with sacks of fragrant frankincense and myrrh, resins that were essential for temple rituals and embalming practices. They show massive logs of precious ebony wood, the deep black heartwood prized for fine furniture and statues. They show gleaming gold and, perhaps most astonishingly, live animals including leopards, giraffes, and even a dancing pygmy, gifts that must have seemed like creatures from another world to the Nile Valley dwellers. Punt was more than a marketplace, it was a source of the exotic and the sacred. Yet for all its detailed descriptions in Egyptian art, the precise location of Punt remains one of history's great geographical puzzles. It was almost certainly not a single city, but a region, a stretch of coastline with trading harbors. Most scholars believe it was located somewhere in the Horn of Africa, modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or Djibouti, or perhaps across the Red Sea in southern Arabia, modern-day Yemen. The evidence points to a place where the unique products of both Africa and Arabia could be gathered. The enduring mystery of Punt's true location is deeply significant. It represents the ultimate driving force behind ancient exploration, the powerful human desire to reach beyond the horizon for what is rare and wonderful. For the Egyptians, Punt was a semi-mythical land of gods and ancestors, a place of origin. Its enduring obscurity reminds us that the most powerful connections in the ancient world were sometimes to places that existed as much in the imagination as on the map, destinations whose very distance and mystery defined their priceless value. While the Egyptians sailed south for mythic treasures, other powers were building their wealth on a far more tangible resource, one that literally defined an age. On the eastern coast of Cyprus, the port of Kition rose to prominence not for gold or incense, but for the dull, reddish-brown metal that gave the island its name. Copper was the indispensable ingredient for bronze, the alloy that made tools, weapons, and the very framework of Bronze Age society. Kition was not just a city near copper mines, it was a colossal, purpose-built industrial harbor designed to control the flow of this critical commodity. Founded around 1300 years before the Common Era, likely by Mycenaean Greeks, the city's true transformation came centuries later when the master traders of the Phoenician world arrived. They saw Kishon's potential with absolute clarity. They embarked on a breathtaking engineering project, constructing massive harbor works to create a safe, deep water anchorage. They built long, roofed structures called ship sheds, where vessels could be hauled ashore for maintenance, repair, and protection from storms or attack. This was not a casual trading post, it was a permanent, fortified naval base and factory. The archaeology reveals a city humming with industry. Beyond the smelting of local copper ore, Kition became a center for another legendary Phoenician craft, the production of Tyrian purple dye. This incredibly valuable pigment, derived from the murex sea snail, stained the robes of emperors and kings. The discovery of mounds of crushed snail shells at the site speaks of a large-scale, messy, and notoriously smelly operation that produced one of the ancient world's most coveted status symbols. So Kition presents a powerful duality. It was both a military asset with its protected ship sheds speaking to organized naval power, and an industrial powerhouse exporting processed copper ingots and bolts of luxurious purple cloth. Its entire existence was engineered around maritime logistics, turning raw materials from the Cypriot hills into finished goods for a waiting Mediterranean market. This port exemplifies a crucial shift from adventurous voyages to distant, mysterious lands like Punt to the systematic, industrialized control of a fundamental resource. Whoever commanded Kition commanded a key link in the supply chain of civilization itself. Beyond the controlled industry of Kition, Phoenician ambition sailed toward a literal edge of the world. Past the familiar waters of the Mediterranean, past the looming pillars that marked the Strait of Gibraltar, they established a settlement so remote it felt like a mission to another planet. This was Gades, known today as Gades, founded around 1100 years before the Common Era. It was not merely a colony, it was a statement of intent planted on the Atlantic coast of what is now Spain. Gades existed for one daring reason: to tap into resources the Mediterranean world could not provide. Its merchants became the crucial link to the legendary, semi-mythical kingdom of Tartessos, a region in southern Iberia famed for its staggering wealth in silver. From Gades, Phoenician ships also sailed north into the terrifying, fog-shrouded waters of the Atlantic, reaching as far as the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, which scholars believe were the shores of Cornwall in Britain. Tin was the other essential component for bronze, and controlling its source alongside Cypriot copper gave the Phoenicians a near monopoly on the most important metal of the age. Gades was more than a mining outpost, it was a profoundly spiritual place. The city was dominated by its magnificent temple dedicated to Melkart, the Phoenician king of the city of Tyre and a god of navigation and colonial expansion. To the Greeks who later visited, Melkart seemed identical to their own hero Hercules, and they believed the temple marked the site of Hercules' final labor. This association was powerful, framing Gades not as a lonely frontier post, but as a place of mythic completion, the very end of the heroic journey. The temple became a required stop for any Phoenician captain embarking into the Atlantic, a place for offerings and prayers for safe passage into the great unknown ocean. So Gades served a dual purpose. It was both a hard-nosed commercial hub funneling silver and tin into the Mediterranean economy and a symbolic lighthouse. It represented the absolute limit of the known world, a gateway where the orderly, island-dotted Mediterranean gave way to the vast, chaotic Atlantic. Every ship that left its harbor was pushing the boundary of human geography, turning myth into map and mystery into profit. From that lonely Atlantic outpost at Gades, the Phoenician network would spawn its most powerful and formidable creation. Carthage began not as a grand capital, but as a simple colony, a daughter of the great city of Tyre. According to legend, it was founded around 814 years before the Common Era by a queen named Dido. Yet from these modest beginnings, it grew into something unprecedented, a maritime superpower whose very existence was defined by its relationship to the sea. Its heart was not a palace or a temple district, but its harbor, a masterpiece of military and commercial engineering that has become legendary. The city boasted not one, but two interconnected artificial basins, dug right into the coastline. The outer, rectangular harbor was for commerce, a bustling water square where merchant ships from across the known world unloaded ivory from Africa, silver from Spain, and tin from distant northern shores. But the true wonder lay just inside, accessible through a narrow, fortified channel. This was the circular military port, the Cothon. At its center stood a massive stone tower for the harbor commander, and ringing the water's edge were 200 sleek ship sheds, all roofed and enclosed, where the Carthaginian war galleys were stored, maintained, and kept hidden from prying eyes. This design was pure genius. It allowed the entire battle fleet to be mobilized and launched in minutes, a terrifying surprise for any enemy. It was the ultimate expression of a civilization that thought first and foremost in terms of naval power and logistical control. That power funded an empire. Carthaginian merchants, inheriting the Phoenician spirit of exploration, pushed further than anyone thought possible. They sailed down the Atlantic coast of West Africa, establishing trade for gold and exotic animals. They regularly braved the stormy passage to Britain to secure the tin that kept the Bronze Age economy turning, even as iron became more common. This vast, revenue-generating network of ports and trade routes transformed Carthage into the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean, a wealthy, sophisticated metropolis that rivaled any in the Greek world. And it was this very dominance that set it on an inevitable collision course with another rising power, one that was just beginning to flex its muscles beyond the Italian peninsula, Rome. The wealth of Carthage, drawn from ports across 3 continents, would soon fund the ships and armies for a series of conflicts so devastating they would be remembered simply as the Punic Wars. The story of this great port, therefore, is not just one of engineering and commerce, but of how control of the sea lanes could create an empire powerful enough to challenge the future master of the ancient world. The collision course set by Carthage's power was not the only way ancient empires managed foreign contact. Far to the east, in the land of the pharaohs, a different kind of experiment in international trade was taking shape. On the Nile Delta, Pharaoh Amosis II made a revolutionary decision around 600 years before the Common Era. He granted a charter to Greek merchants, allowing them to build their own city, a trading enclave named Naukratis. This was not an invasion or a colony taken by force. It was a deliberate, state-sanctioned gateway. For the first time, a foreign power was given a permanent, legal foothold on Egyptian soil. Naukratis was designed as a controlled valve, a single point where the immense wealth of Egypt could flow out to the eager Greek world, and Greek goods like silver and olive oil could flow in, all under the watchful eye of the pharaoh's officials. The city became a bustling, cosmopolitan hub, divided into quarters named for different Greek city-states like Samos, Miletus, and Aegina. Each maintained its own temples and warehouses, creating a miniature map of Greece on the banks of the Nile. Through this one authorized port, Egypt funneled its legendary exports, vast quantities of grain to feed growing Greek cities, precious papyrus for record-keeping, exquisite linen, and that most sacred of commodities, gold. But Naukratis traded in far more than material goods. It became a direct channel for ideas, a place of profound cultural fusion. Greek merchants, soldiers, and travelers living there were immersed in a civilization thousands of years older than their own. They walked among colossal stone temples, observed complex religious rituals, and learned from Egyptian mathematics and engineering. This direct exposure had a transformative effect back in Greece. Egyptian artistic styles began to influence the rigid forms of early Greek sculpture, leading toward the more naturalistic Kouros statues. Philosophers like Thales and Pythagoras are said to have traveled to Egypt, and while the details are debated, the very idea points to Naukratis as a likely conduit for mathematical and philosophical concepts. The city was a living classroom, proving that a port could be a controlled space not just for commerce, but for the quiet, revolutionary exchange of knowledge. It showed that two great civilizations could meet not on a battlefield, but on a dockside, and in doing so, permanently alter the course of art, thought, and history. The quiet cultural exchange at Naukratis had a daring, adventurous cousin far to the west. While the Greeks in Egypt operated under a pharaoh's charter, other Greeks were carving out a new life on a wild and unfamiliar coast. Around 600 years before the Common Era, sailors from the Ionian city of Phakia, fleeing Persian pressure, sailed past the rocky shores of Liguria and discovered a perfect, sheltered bay at the mouth of the Rhone River. They named their settlement Massalia, a city we know today as Marseille. This was not a trading post, it was a bold colonial implant, a piece of Greece deliberately placed at the gateway to an entirely different world, the vast, mysterious continent of Celtic Europe. Massalia's genius was in becoming a translator between two civilizations. Its merchants acted as intermediaries, moving up the Rhone and Saône river valleys deep into the heart of Gaul. From the Celtic tribes of the interior, they secured precious commodities the Mediterranean craved. There was tin, likely from Brittany or even Cornwall, still vital for bronze. There was gleaming amber, fossilized tree resin that traveled all the way from the Baltic Sea, prized for jewelry and amulets. And there was also a darker trade in individuals captured in tribal conflicts and brought to the coast for exchange. In return, the Massalians offered the sophisticated products of the Greek world, amphorae filled with strong, ricinated wine, beautifully painted pottery, and golden olive oil, luxuries that quickly became status symbols among Celtic chieftains. This commercial bridge had profound cultural consequences. Greek artistic motifs began appearing on Celtic metalwork. The concept of coinage, introduced by Massalia, slowly spread north, transforming local economies. The Greek alphabet was adapted to write the Celtic language, preserving some of the earliest records of a largely oral culture. Massalia was not just a port, it was a filter, selectively allowing Greek ideas to flow inland while funneling northern wealth back to the Mediterranean. Its strategic location made it a prize. During the Great Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, Massalia became a critical Roman ally. Its fleet provided vital naval intelligence and support, its harbor a safe haven for Roman ships operating far from home. By choosing Rome, Massalia secured its own survival and influence, even as the power dynamics of the Mediterranean shifted irrevocably. The city's legacy is the story of a frontier, a place where the polished world of the Mediterranean met the vibrant, formidable cultures of the north, and in the bustling market between its docks, a new chapter of European history began to be written. The Greek experiment at Massalia proved a port could be a cultural bridge, but for one city, the harbor was not a bridge, it was a lifeline, the very source of its power and its peril. In the 5th century before the Common Era, Athens was a democracy in a dangerous world, and its survival depended on a radical new vision for a place called Piraeus. Before this, Athens used an open beach at Phaleron, but the visionary statesman Themistocles saw its fatal flaw. He convinced his fellow citizens to fortify the natural harbors of Piraeus, a rocky peninsula a few miles southwest of the city. This was not an expansion, it was a total strategic pivot, a declaration that Athens' future lay not on land, but on the sea. Themistocles oversaw the construction of massive, state-of-the-art fortifications around Piraeus, walls so thick and strong they became legendary. But his most audacious idea was to physically tether the port to the city. The Athenians built 2 parallel long walls, creating a fortified corridor nearly 4 miles long that connected Athens directly to the harbors of Piraeus. A third wall was added later, running to Phaleron for extra security. This architectural marvel meant that as long as Athens commanded the sea, it could never be starved into submission by a land siege. Supplies, troops, and communication could flow safely between the city and its ships, no matter what enemy armies camped in the Attic countryside. Piraeus itself was a masterpiece of organized logistics. It was divided into 3 specialized harbors. The largest, Cantharos, was the commercial heart, a constant riot of noise and activity where hundreds of merchant ships unloaded grain from the Black Sea, timber from Macedonia, and spices from the east. The other 2, Zee and Munichia, were dedicated military ports, home to the Athenian Navy's legendary trireme fleet. At Zee alone, archaeologists have identified the remains of nearly 200 ship sheds, long, roofed galleries where the sleek warships were stored and maintained. This separation was crucial. It kept the vital business of trade flowing smoothly, insulated from the martial bustle of the Navy, and that trade was about one thing above all else: grain. Athens' rocky soil could not grow enough food to feed its massive population of citizens, slaves, and resident foreigners. Every year, a vast fleet of grain ships had to sail from the fertile plains of Crimea and Ukraine, through the treacherous Bosporus and across the Aegean to Piraeus. The grain dole that fed the poorest Athenian citizens, the very fuel of its democracy, arrived in the holds of those ships. This made control of the sea lanes not a matter of imperial ambition, but of existential necessity. Every naval battle, every tribute payment extracted from allied cities, every decision of the Athenian assembly was ultimately about securing the route from the Black Sea to the harbor of Piraeus. The port's bustling agora was a microcosm of the Athenian Empire, filled with sailors from Egypt, merchants from Phoenicia, and bankers from across the Greek world. Piraeus was the engine of Athenian glory, but it also created a profound vulnerability. The city's fate was now irrevocably tied to the wooden walls of its ships, a dependency that would be tested to its breaking point in the coming decades. That Athenian dependency on the Black Sea grain route created a volatile world of rival powers, a world that would eventually demand a new kind of port, one built not on military might, but on the rule of law. In the turbulent centuries after Alexander the Great's empire splintered, one island state rose to become the indispensable neutral hub of the entire eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes was not a vast territorial empire, but its wealth and influence were built on a foundation of trust and meticulous order. Its harbors became a safe zone where merchants from warring kingdoms, From the rival Greek successor states of Ptolemaic Egypt and Seleucid Syria to the rising power of Rome, could all dock their ships, negotiate deals, and settle disputes under a common, respected legal framework. This framework was the Rhodian Sea Law, a comprehensive code that governed everything from shipping contracts and freight rates to liability for lost or damaged cargo in a storm. It established clear rules for jettisoning goods to save a ship, a practice known as general average, where all merchants whose cargo was saved would proportionally compensate those whose goods were sacrificed. This brilliant legal innovation spread economic risk, making merchants more willing to finance dangerous, long-distance voyages. It was the ancient world's version of maritime insurance, and it made Rhodes the trusted arbiter of international commerce. The island's prosperity was visibly crowned by one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes. While popular legend often depicts it straddling the harbor entrance, it was more likely a towering bronze statue of the sun god Helios standing beside the port. Its true significance was not as a physical gateway, but as a monumental advertisement. It proclaimed to every arriving captain that this city possessed the wealth, the technical skill, and the divine favor to protect and enrich all who traded under its watch. That promise was backed by formidable reality. Rhodes positioned itself as the central clearinghouse for the Mediterranean's most vital commodity, grain. Its merchant fleet and banking houses orchestrated the flow of Egyptian wheat from Alexandria and Ukrainian barley from the Black Sea, stabilizing prices and supplies across a fractured political landscape. Rhodian bankers developed sophisticated instruments like bottomry loans, where a merchant could borrow money for a voyage using the ship itself as collateral, with the debt being forgiven if the ship was lost. This system unlocked capital and fueled trade on an unprecedented scale. The island became a cosmopolitan nerve center where information was as valuable as spices, where news of harvests, wars, and shipwrecks flowed in and was carefully analyzed to guide investments. In an age of empires, Rhodes thrived by mastering something more powerful, the architecture of trust, proving that the most enduring port in a chaotic world is one built not on walls of stone, but on pillars of law and financial ingenuity. Rhodes mastered the architecture of trust, but one man envisioned a port that would become the very blueprint for the connected world. When Alexander the Great stood on the marshy coast of Egypt in 331 before the Common Era, he did not see a fishing village. He saw a blank canvas for a new kind of global capital. He sketched the outline of a city in the sand with barley meal, a prophetic gesture for a metropolis that would feed the Mediterranean for centuries. Alexandria was not an organic growth, it was the ultimate planned port, a deliberate fusion of Greek intellect and Egyptian geography designed to command the crossroads of continents. Its location was a stroke of strategic genius, positioned on a thin strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the vast, reed-filled Lake Marotes. This allowed engineers to create not one, but 2 magnificent harbors, the Great Harbor facing the open sea for Mediterranean traffic, and the Eunostos Harbor connected to the lake and, crucially, to a canal leading directly to the Nile. This canal was the city's secret weapon, a liquid highway that turned Alexandria into a colossal transfer point. Goods arriving from the east could be moved from seagoing ships to river barges without costly overland transport, flowing seamlessly into the heart of Egypt and beyond. But the city's most famous landmark was a beacon of both safety and ambition. At the entrance to the Great Harbor on the island of Pharos rose a tower of such scale and brilliance it defined the term lighthouse. Constructed in 3 tiers of gleaming white marble, it stood over 300 feet tall. At its summit, a great furnace burned, its light amplified by a massive polished bronze mirror, projecting a guiding beam visible from an astonishing distance out at sea. For centuries, the Pharos lighthouse was more than a navigational aid. It was a symbol of enlightened order imposed upon the chaotic darkness, a welcoming promise to every merchant vessel from Gibraltar to the Levant that they had reached the center of the civilized world. Yet Alexandria's true light came from within. The great library and its attached Mauseon, or Temple of the Muses, were not mere repositories of scrolls. They were a state-funded research institute, the ancient world's Silicon Valley. Scholars from across the known world were invited to live and work there at royal expense, copying, translating, and debating every text they could acquire. Ships entering the harbor were reportedly searched not for contraband, but for books which were confiscated, copied, and the copies returned to their owners. This relentless pursuit of knowledge gathered Greek philosophy, Egyptian astronomy, Babylonian mathematics, and Indian medical texts under one roof, creating an unprecedented synthesis of global thought. And through its eastern gate, the city lived up to its purpose. From the Red Sea ports of Myos, Hormos, and Berenice, caravans arrived laden with the treasures of the Indian Ocean trade, black pepper and cinnamon from India, silks from China, and ivory and exotic animals from the coast of Africa. These luxuries were funneled through Alexandria's warehouses, taxed by the Ptolemaic kings, and shipped out to the palaces and markets of Greece and Rome. The city became the indispensable middleman, the grand exchange where three continents met. Its bustling streets were a cacophony of languages, a mosaic of temples, and a testament to the power of a single idea, that a port could be more than a place of exchange. It could be the intellectual and commercial capital of the world, a lighthouse for the human mind. The brilliant light of Alexandria's pharaohs was a beacon for the world, but it was fueled by a secret artery stretching far to the south. To capture the riches of the east, the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt needed a direct line to the source, a port that could stare across the Indian Ocean. So they built one in the most improbable place imaginable, on a barren, windswept bay of the Red Sea, where jagged mountains meet a desolate shore. Ptolemy II founded Berenice Troglodytica. Its very name hints at its remote and harsh reality, Troglodytica meaning land of the cave dwellers. This was not a city built for comfort or grandeur. It was a strategic outpost, a calculated gamble in the desert. Its entire purpose was to cut out the costly network of Arabian middlemen who had controlled the spice trade for centuries. From Berenice, Egyptian ships could now catch the monsoon winds directly to the Malabar coast of India, returning with holds full of priceless cargo. But getting those treasures to the heart of Egypt was a logistical nightmare. Berenice was isolated, with no river or fertile land to support it. Every scrap of food and every drop of fresh water had to be shipped in. More importantly, the spices and silks arriving from India had to get to the Nile, and from there to Alexandria. The solution was a caravan route of brutal simplicity. From Berenice, a track led west for 250 miles across the waterless eastern desert to the city of Koptos on the Nile. This journey was undertaken by tough, organized camel caravans, moving in disciplined lines under the relentless sun. The port itself was a fortress of commerce in a wasteland. Recent archaeology has peeled back the sand to reveal a town meticulously planned with storerooms, administrative buildings, and even a temple to the goddess Isis. And within these ruins, the proof of its global reach is astonishingly concrete. In the soil, archaeologists have found the largest single deposit of black pepper from the Roman era ever discovered outside of India, over 16 pounds of peppercorns still resting in a pottery jar. They have uncovered timbers of Indian teak wood, used to repair ships, a material that could only have come from across the ocean. Most telling of all are the small, broken pottery shards inscribed with graffiti in Tamil Brahmi script, the writing of ancient South India. These are not official records but personal notes, the marks of Indian sailors or merchants who found themselves in this distant Egyptian outpost, scratching their names or perhaps a prayer onto a piece of broken crockery. This is the intimate, human evidence of a direct connection. Berenice was the harsh, vital link in a chain that stretched from the Ganges to the Tiber, a desert gateway where the monsoon winds met the camel trains, funneling the flavors and fortunes of Asia directly into the waiting hands of Rome. While Berenice was a harsh desert gateway, another port thrived on a very different principle, not isolation but absolute openness. On a tiny, rocky island in the heart of the Aegean Sea, a political decision transformed a sacred site into an economic supernova. In 166 years before the Common Era, Rome made a declaration that would reshape Mediterranean commerce. It declared the island of Delos a free port, permanently exempt from all taxes and duties. Overnight, this speck of land, the mythical birthplace of the gods Apollo and Artemis, became the ultimate commercial haven. The result was an explosion of human activity unlike anything the ancient world had seen. Merchants from across the known world descended upon its shores, turning it into the primary clearinghouse for two of antiquity's most consequential and difficult commodities, grain and enslaved individuals. The island's infrastructure was rebuilt at a frantic pace to handle this torrent of trade. Warehouses lined the once serene coast, and the harbor was enlarged to accommodate a constant stream of ships. The most telling ruin is the massive Agora of the Italians, a sprawling, colonnaded marketplace built by Roman and Italian businessmen. This was not a graceful public square for philosophy. It was a hard-nosed, utilitarian complex designed for high-volume transactions. Inscriptions found here record the names of wealthy traders and banking families, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers of their day, who orchestrated deals that fed cities and built fortunes. The island's character was defined by this relentless commercial drive. Walking its streets, you would have heard a cacophony of languages, Greek, Latin, Phoenician, and Aramaic, all haggling over prices. You would have seen temples and shrines built by foreign merchant communities, not just to the Greek gods, but to deities from Egypt, Syria, and Phoenicia, each group establishing a little piece of home to seek divine favor for their ventures. Delos was a pure, unfiltered experiment in globalization, a place where cultural exchange happened not for intellectual pursuit, as in Alexandria, but as a byproduct of the frantic pursuit of profit. Its entire existence was a testament to the power of a single policy, the removal of a tariff barrier, to concentrate the wealth of an entire sea onto one small, sacred rock. For a few chaotic, prosperous decades, Delos was not just a port. It was the bustling, immoral, and indispensable stock exchange of the Mediterranean world, where the fates of harvests and human lives were traded with equal calculation. The frantic, tax-free markets of Delos served a single, hungry master. All roads, and more importantly all sea lanes, ultimately led to Rome, but the great city itself was not on the coast. Its lifeblood had to flow up a shallow, winding river, and the gatekeeper of that vital flow was a bustling, pragmatic city named Ostia. Founded as a military colony in the 4th century before the Common Era to guard the mouth of the Tiber, Ostia's purpose evolved with Rome's insatiable appetite. It became the empire's stomach, a colossal logistics center where the wealth of the Mediterranean was processed, stored, and shipped upstream to the capital. The scale of this operation was breathtaking. Walk through the ruins today and you are surrounded by the architecture of abundance. Towering brick warehouses called horia dominate the landscape. These were not simple sheds, but fortified, multi-roomed complexes with raised floors to keep grain dry and safe from pests. Some were dedicated to specific commodities, like the horia of the pepper, hinting at the exotic spices that passed through. Others, like the massive granaries of Hortensius, held the empire's most vital resource, the annual grain shipment from Egypt and North Africa. The arrival of the grain fleet was a moment of high public drama and relief, for the free dole of bread that pacified Rome's massive population depended entirely on the smooth operation of this port. To manage this ceaseless flow of goods, Ostia developed a remarkably modern urban landscape. It is famed for its early examples of insulae, multi-story apartment blocks built of brick-faced concrete that housed the port's vast workforce. Dockworkers, sailors, clerks, and merchants from across the empire lived in these buildings, creating a crowded, vibrant, and diverse riverside community. Temples to gods from Egypt and the Near East stood alongside shrines to Roman deities, reflecting the origins of the people who kept the machinery of supply running. Every crane that lifted an amphora, every barge pulled up the Tiber, every sack of wheat measured in a warehouse was part of a single, grand calculation. Ostia's efficiency was the linchpin of Roman stability. If the port faltered, if grain rotted in its silos or ships could not unload, the murmur of discontent in Rome would quickly turn to riot. This made Ostia one of the most strategically critical sites in the ancient world, a place where the abstract concept of imperial power was made brutally concrete in the form of warehouses, cranes, and the daily bread of 1 million people. The relentless machinery of Ostia fed Rome, but the empire's true wealth often flowed from its furthest, most opulent edges. On the coast of North Africa, where the desert meets the sea, one city grew so rich and splendid it seemed to defy its own geography. This was Leptis Magna. Its story begins not with Rome, but with the same seafaring people who built Carthage, the Phoenicians. For centuries, it was a modest Punic trading post. But fate, in the form of a local boy made emperor, would transform it into one of the most breathtaking urban showcases of the entire Roman world. That boy was Lucius Septimius Severus, born in Leptis Magna in 145 of the Common Era. When he seized the imperial throne after a brutal civil war, he did not forget his hometown. He showered it with a building program of staggering extravagance, turning it into a marble advertisement for his power and the province's loyalty. The city's entire layout was re-engineered around a new, artificially improved harbor. Engineers constructed massive breakwaters and dredged a deep basin, allowing the largest grain ships and merchant vessels to dock safely. From this harbor, a grand colonnaded street over 1,000 feet long stretched into the heart of the city, lined with hundreds of marble columns and shaded porticos. This street culminated in a magnificent new forum and basilica, built with rare pink granite from Egypt and gleaming white marble from Greece. The scale was almost overwhelming, a deliberate statement that this African city could rival the grandeur of Rome itself. But what funded this astonishing transformation? Leptis Magna was the Mediterranean's window on a hidden world of riches, the terminus of the Trans-Saharan trade routes. From deep in the African interior, long camel caravans arrived at oasis towns south of the city, bearing treasures that fueled the empire's luxury economy. There was gold panned from West African rivers which flowed into Roman mints to be struck into coins. There was ivory carved into fine furniture and statuettes for wealthy households. And there were exotic animals captured for the spectacles in Rome's Colosseum, lions, leopards, and elephants that would have first set foot on Roman soil at this very port. Leptis Magna was the vital funnel where the wealth of a continent crossed from sand to sea. The city's lavish architecture, paid for by tariffs on this trade, made it a shimmering mirage in the desert, a monument to how Rome's appetite for distant luxuries could sculpt the very landscape, turning a provincial port into a marble jewel. Leptis Magna's marble splendor was funded by caravans crossing the desert, but its riches first had to cross an ocean. To capture those eastern treasures, Rome needed more than one desert port. While Berenice was the southern anchor, its northern counterpart, Myos Hormos, thrived as a bustling, gritty sister harbor on the same unforgiving Red Sea coast. If Berenice was a remote fortress of trade, Myos Hormos was its frantic, crowded sibling, a place where the sheer volume of commerce left a physical mark on the landscape that we can still see today. Reaching it was an ordeal in itself. After sailing down from the Mediterranean, merchants would disembark at a Nile port like Koptos and join a caravan for a brutal 8-day trek eastward. The route crossed a waterless desert plateau known as the Eastern Desert, a realm of scorching days, freezing nights, and bandits lying in wait. Surviving this journey was the first test, and the reward was the sight of the Red Sea and the hive of activity that was Myos Hormos. The port's significance is dramatically confirmed not just on land but beneath the waves. In the nearby waters, archaeologists have located the remains of several Roman-era shipwrecks, including one that bears the port's own name. The wreck of the Myos Hormos vessel is a time capsule of this maritime highway. Its structure reveals shipbuilding techniques adapted for the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, with sturdy hulls designed to carry massive cargoes on the long, direct sail to India. These were not coastal barges but true ocean-going freighters. And what did they carry? The evidence is a trail of artifacts that stretches for thousands of miles. All across southern India, from coastal trading towns to inland centers, hordes of Roman gold and silver coins have been unearthed. They are often found alongside distinctive Roman pottery, like the fine red gloss tableware known as terra sigillata, and most tellingly, the shattered necks and handles of wine amphorae from Italy and the Aegean. The ancient Tamils, it seems, developed a taste for Roman wine, importing it by the shipload. This was not a one-way flow of treasure. Back at Myos Hormos and its desert road, the return cargo from India is found in the very dust of the site. Archaeologists sifting through the ancient garbage dumps, the middens of the port, have recovered mountains of black peppercorns, fragments of Indian-made pottery, and delicate cotton textiles from the subcontinent. The scale is staggering, speaking of a truly industrialized exchange. This monsoon-driven commerce was a two-way street of astonishing reliability and volume. Every year, as the seasonal winds shifted, a fleet would depart from Myos Hormos, riding the summer monsoon eastward to the Indian coast. There, they would trade their silver, wine, and glass for pepper, gems, and silk, then wait for the winter monsoon to blow them back home. This was not occasional contact. It was a scheduled, cyclical pulse of globalization, a rhythm dictated by the planet's weather and financed by Roman silver. The desert caravans and the ocean freighters were links in the same unbroken chain, a supply line that connected the forums of Rome to the markets of India, with Myos Hormos serving as one of the vital, sun-baked transfer points where the goods of the world changed hands. The monsoon winds that filled the sails to Myos Hormos did not simply stop at the Egyptian coast. They propelled Roman merchants all the way to the shores of the Indian subcontinent itself. In a quiet lagoon near modern Pondicherry, the ancient port of Arakemdu reveals what happened when those Roman ships finally reached their eastern destination. This was not a remote outpost, but a vibrant South Indian settlement that became a crucial partner in the Indo-Roman trade network, flourishing from around the 2nd century before the Common Era to the 2nd century of the Common Era. The archaeology here tells a story of mutual exchange, not conquest. Excavations have unearthed a fascinating blend of cultures. There are shattered remains of Roman transport jars, amphorae that once held wine or olive oil from the Mediterranean. There are fragments of fine, red gloss pottery known as a retine ware, a luxury tableware from Italy, and there are pieces of Roman glass, likely brought as ballast or as trade items themselves. But these foreign goods are found alongside evidence of a sophisticated local industry. Arakemdu was a major center for the production of exquisite stone and glass beads, crafted with techniques that were highly prized. This suggests the port was not merely a passive recipient of Roman goods, but an active manufacturing hub with its own valuable exports. So what did the Roman merchants come for? The answer is a catalogue of Indian luxury. Black pepper, of course, was a prime commodity, along with precious pearls fished from the Gulf of Mannar. Semi-precious stones like beryl and carnelian were highly sought after for jewelry. And perhaps most importantly, there were fine Indian textiles, especially cotton muslins so delicate they were described as woven air. These were not bulk commodities for the masses, they were high-value luxuries for the elite of Rome. The presence of Roman artifacts at Arakhamdu and equally Indian artifacts in the Roman world paints a picture of a balanced commercial relationship. It shows the Indian subcontinent not as a distant, mythical land, but as an active, sophisticated participant in long-distance exchange. Roman silver coins found here were not just treasure, they were a preferred medium of exchange, often melted down and reminted by local kingdoms. This port was a meeting point where two complex economies connected, a place where the spices of the East were traded for the silver and wine of the West, proving that globalization in the ancient world was always a two-way street. The bustling exchange at Arakhamdu was just one point on a vast Indian Ocean coastline threaded with ports. Further west, where the mighty Indus River meets the Arabian Sea, another gateway thrived in the shadows of empires. For centuries, a port known to the Romans as Barbaricum served as the maritime mouth of the Silk Road. This was no simple fishing village. It was a sophisticated customs house and transshipment hub, meticulously documented in a 1st century merchant's guide called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. According to that ancient text, Roman trading ships sailing from Egypt would time their voyages with the monsoon winds, arriving at Barbaricum to find a well-organized operation. The port's primary function was to receive the riches of the Asian interior and transfer them to seagoing vessels bound for the west. From the mines of distant Afghanistan came deep blue lapis lazuli, a stone more precious than gold to Roman eyes, destined to be ground into vibrant pigment for frescoes and jewelry. From the agricultural plains of the Indus Valley came piles of dark indigo dye, a color that would stain the togas of senators, and bales of fine cotton textiles, lighter and more comfortable than wool in the Mediterranean heat. But how did these inland treasures reach the coast? Barbaricum's power came from its position at the end of a riverine highway. The Indus River acted as a liquid conveyor belt, carrying goods downstream from the northern reaches of the Indian subcontinent and, crucially, from the overland caravan routes that spiderwebbed out of Central Asia. This is where the maritime and terrestrial worlds fused. A bolt of Chinese silk carried thousands of miles on the backs of Bactrian camels along the Silk Road, could be unloaded at a market in the Punjab, then shipped down the Indus to Barbaricum. There it would be traded to a Roman merchant whose ship had brought silver coins, coral from the Mediterranean, and fine wine. The port was the critical pivot point, the place where the dusty Silk Road met the salty monsoon winds. It made the Roman Empire a direct consumer of goods from the very heart of Asia, bypassing countless middlemen. The existence of Barbaricum reveals a profound truth about ancient globalization. The most successful ports were never isolated. They were nodes in a complex web, where a river could become an extension of a desert track, and a ship's hold became the final link in a chain that stretched from the mountains of Afghanistan to the forums of Rome. Barbaricum was a known quantity, a documented stop on a merchant's map, but beyond it lay a place that existed only as a rumor, a name on the very edge of the possible. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, the great geographer Claudius Ptolemy recorded a distant port called Catagara, said to have been reached by a Greek sailor named Alexander after a long voyage from the Golden Chersonese, which we know as the Malay Peninsula. Ptolemy placed it on his world map at the furthest eastern reach of the inhabited world, bordering the great unknown sea. For centuries, Catagara was not a real city you could sail to. It was a symbol, the ultimate destination, representing the absolute limit of Greco-Roman geographical knowledge. Scholars have debated its location for ages, with theories placing it somewhere in the Gulf of Thailand or even on the coast of southern China, near the estuary of the Mekong River or the Pearl River. It might have been a real trading post where Chinese merchants met sailors from the Indian Ocean world, or it might have been a composite legend, a story built from the tales of many voyages that pushed a little further east each generation. The power of Katagara lay in its mystery. It was the blank space on the map that whispered of untold wealth, the final piece of a puzzle that would connect the entire Eurasian landmass by sea. This quest to find the sea route to the Far East, to turn Katagara from a legend into a latitude and longitude, became a driving obsession that outlived the Roman Empire itself. Medieval Arab and Persian geographers pondered it, and their maps and writings filtered into Renaissance Europe. When Portuguese captains like Vasco da Gama began edging down the African coast, and later when Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic, they were, in a very real sense, still searching for Katagara. They were trying to complete the circuit that Ptolemy had sketched, to reach the sources of silk and spice by outflanking the overland routes. So this phantom port, this name from an ancient text, represents something profound, the enduring human desire to push past the known horizon. It connects the classical geographers straining to understand their world directly to the age of discovery, proving that the most powerful ports are sometimes the ones we can only imagine, for they are the ones that compel us to explore. While Katagara remained a legend on the edge of maps, another power was turning its Red Sea coast into a corridor of immense wealth and influence. The kingdom of Axum, rising in the highlands of what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, commanded a view of the world from its mountain capital, but its true power flowed through a bustling port on the coast below. Adulis was the maritime heartbeat of an African empire, a place where the goods of a continent met the ships of the world. For over 6 centuries, from the 1st to the 7th century of the Common Era, this harbor was the critical link between two great trading spheres, the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. From the African interior, long caravans descended to Adulis carrying treasures that were legendary across the ancient world. There were colossal tusks of ivory, so prized for carving and luxury that Roman officials kept detailed records of their import. There was gold panned from riverbeds deep in the interior, which would be minted into coins bearing the faces of Aksumite kings. And there were live animals, giraffes, rhinoceroses, and elephants, captured for the royal zoos and amphitheaters of Rome and later Constantinople. This was not a one-sided exchange. In return, Axum imported fine textiles from India, glassware and wine from the Roman world, and iron tools and weapons to strengthen its own armies. The kingdom's sophistication is etched in metal. Axum was one of the very few states outside the Roman Empire to issue its own gold coinage, a bold statement of economic independence and prestige. These coins, bearing inscriptions in Greek and Gades, the local language, and the image of the ruler, circulated from Alexandria to southern India, a tangible symbol of a truly global player. This outward-looking identity took a profound spiritual turn in the 4th century. Under King Azana, Axum officially adopted Christianity, making it one of the earliest states in the world to do so, decades before the Roman Empire itself. This was not an isolated conversion. It was a conscious alignment with the wider Christian world of the Mediterranean, facilitated by those very trade routes through Adulis. The port connected Axum to theological debates in Alexandria and architectural styles in Syria, weaving the highland kingdom into the fabric of a broader religious community. The story of Axum and Adulis reshapes our understanding of ancient Africa. This was not a remote or isolated civilization, but a central, literate, and innovative node in a network that spanned from Britain to Sri Lanka. Its monumental stelae, its written language, and its international coinage all speak of a society that looked confidently outward, using its command of the sea to build a kingdom that was both uniquely African and undeniably part of the ancient world's great conversation. The confident gaze of Axum across the Indian Ocean was mirrored by another great empire looking outward from the opposite shore. While the Tang dynasty is famed for the overland Silk Road, its true economic powerhouse faced the sea. In the bustling, subtropical south of China, the port of Guangzhou, known for centuries as Canton, became the epicenter of a maritime network that would forever alter the balance of global trade. This was not merely a Chinese harbor, it was a deliberately created international zone, a Tang dynasty vision of controlled globalization. To manage the unprecedented influx of foreign ships and merchants, the imperial government established a new office, the Superintendent of Maritime Trade. This official was not a simple harbor master, he was a diplomat, tax collector, and regulator, ensuring that the flow of goods and people served the empire's interests and filled its coffers with valuable customs duties. The city itself was designed to accommodate this new world. Separate, walled quarters were established along the riverfront for the different trading communities. There was the Arab and Persian quarter, where merchants from the caliphates lived and worshipped, building some of the earliest mosques in China. Nearby were enclaves for traders from the kingdoms of India and Southeast Asia. Each community was largely self-governed under its own leaders, allowed to maintain its customs and religions as long as order was kept and taxes were paid. This pragmatic policy created a stunningly cosmopolitan city where the scent of incense from a Buddhist temple might mingle with the call to prayer from a minaret, and where the languages of the marketplace were as diverse as the goods on the docks. And what ships filled those docks? The Chinese junks that called Guangzhou home were leviathans of the ancient seas. Described by Arab travelers with awe, these vessels were constructed with watertight bulkheads, a brilliant innovation that made them incredibly resilient to damage. They were powered by multiple masts and battened sails that could catch the wind with remarkable efficiency, and they could carry hundreds of sailors and passengers along with cargo holds of staggering capacity. From Guangzhou, these junks sailed south with the monsoon winds, their holds packed with the iconic exports that defined China to the world. There was delicate celadon and brilliant white porcelain, a material so fine and durable it was more valuable than gold in some markets. There were bolts of luminous silk woven into patterns that told stories, and there were chests of tea, a leaf that would later become a global obsession. In return, the ships brought back tropical hardwoods, spices like cloves and nutmeg from the Indonesian archipelago, ivory, and perhaps most importantly, vast quantities of silver and gold from the Middle East, which stabilized the Tang economy. This systematic, state-managed exchange through Guangzhou did something profound. It shifted the center of gravity. While the overland Silk Road was vulnerable to bandits and the politics of Central Asia, the maritime route offered volume and reliability. Guangzhou became the indispensable engine of Tang prosperity, a vibrant, noisy, and brilliantly organized gateway that proved the world could be connected not just by the slow tread of camels, but by the billowing sails of magnificent ships. The magnificent Chinese junks sailing from Guangzhou often had a crucial midway destination on their long journey west. On the northern shore of the Persian Gulf, nestled between jagged mountains and a brilliant blue sea, the port of Siraf rose to become the indispensable middleman of the early Islamic world. At its peak in the 9th and 10th centuries, this was the premier harbor of the Abbasid Caliphate, the bustling maritime gateway that connected the splendors of Baghdad to the distant markets of China and India. Siraf was more than a stopover. It was a thriving industrial city built on the riches of the sea and the ingenuity of long-distance trade. Its wealth began just offshore, in the warm, shallow waters of the Gulf. The city was the epicenter of the Persian pearl industry, sending divers down to harvest the luminous gems that adorned the caliphs and elites from Cordoba to Chang'an. This local treasure provided a solid foundation of capital, but Siraf's true fortune came from its strategic position. It sat perfectly on the Maritime Silk Road, where the monsoon-driven trade from the east met the caravan routes leading inland to the heart of the Islamic Empire. The archaeological record paints a vivid picture of this global exchange. Excavations at Siraf have unearthed thousands of ceramic fragments, and among them are distinct pieces of Chinese stoneware and delicate porcelain, tangible proof of ships arriving directly from the Far East. Alongside these Asian imports, researchers have found artifacts from the opposite direction, including pottery and beads from the Swahili coast of East Africa, suggesting Sirafi merchants were active across the entire Indian Ocean. The city itself was a marvel of adaptation, with wealthy merchants building spacious courtyard homes designed to catch the Gulf breeze, their walls decorated with intricate stucco work. A grand mosque stood at its center, and the harbor was protected by a formidable breakwater, speaking to the scale of the ships it welcomed. Yet this prosperity was built on a geological fault line, both literally and figuratively. In the 10th century, a series of powerful earthquakes struck the region, severely damaging Siraf's infrastructure and its precious freshwater sources. The tremors shattered not just buildings but also confidence. As the city struggled to recover, political shifts and changing trade patterns began to favor rival ports. To the east, the island fortress of Hormuz rose to prominence, offering safer anchorage and a more strategic position for controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Siraf's importance gradually faded, its once bustling warehouses falling silent. Its story is a poignant chapter in the history of connectivity, a reminder that even the greatest trading hubs existed at the mercy of nature's power and the relentless, shifting currents of commerce. The fading echoes of Siraf's trade were soon replaced by a new, thunderous rhythm on the opposite side of the Asian continent. In southeastern China, a port named Quanzhou rose to become the undisputed center of the world, a city so wealthy and cosmopolitan it seemed to gather the entire globe within its walls. Under the Mongol Yuan dynasty, this harbor, known to European merchants as Zaytun, grew into the largest and most vital port on earth, a living testament to the sheer scale of Mongol-facilitated trade. The sheer diversity of its population was etched into the city's very stone. Walking its bustling streets in the 13th century, you would have passed the serene, ocean-facing Qingjing Mosque, founded by Arab traders centuries earlier, its architecture a graceful fusion of Chinese and Islamic styles. Not far away, you might have found a temple dedicated to Shiva, built by a community of Tamil merchants from southern India, its sculptures telling Hindu epics in a Chinese setting. In the surrounding hills, tombstones carved with crosses and Syriac inscriptions marked the resting places of Nestorian Christians from Central Asia. This was not mere tolerance, it was a practical, vibrant multiculturalism fueled by commerce, where a trader's faith mattered less than the quality of his goods and the weight of his silver. The city's reputation drew the greatest travelers of the age. The Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta arrived here in the 1340s, declaring it the greatest port he had ever seen, a place where hundreds of enormous junks and countless smaller vessels crowded a waterfront that seemed to stretch forever. Decades earlier, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo had departed from this same harbor, escorting a Mongol princess to Persia and carrying tales of its splendor back to Europe. It was from Quanzhou, he reported, that the silk called zaytuni, a word that would enter European languages as satin, was exported to the world, but Quanzhou's ultimate legacy is tied to a later, breathtaking chapter. In the early 15th century, it served as a key departure point for the legendary treasure fleets of the Ming Admiral Zheng He. These armadas, comprising hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men, were the most powerful maritime force the world had ever witnessed. They were stocked with porcelain, silk, and tea from Quanzhou's warehouses, and sailed from its harbor to project Chinese power and diplomacy across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as the coast of Africa. For a few brilliant centuries, Quanzhou was the nexus where overland Mongol routes met the maritime Silk Road, where all religions found a home, and where the ambitions of emperors and explorers alike were launched onto the tides. While Quanzhou's fleet sailed east from China, another powerful network was flourishing far to the west along the sun-drenched coast of Africa. For centuries, a string of independent city-states thrived on the edge of the Indian Ocean, and among the most illustrious was Mogadishu. From its foundations in the 9th century, this was not a colonial outpost but a sovereign Swahili metropolis, a brilliant fusion of African, Arab, and Persian influences that grew wealthy by linking continents. Its merchants spoke a unique language, Swahili, a Bantu tongue enriched with Arabic vocabulary, which became the lingua franca of commerce from Mozambique to Somalia. This linguistic blend mirrored the city's physical and cultural landscape. Mogadishu's wealth was built on the riches of the African interior. Caravans arriving from the hinterlands brought gold dust from distant mines, massive elephant tusks of ivory, and precious aromatic woods like sandalwood and frankincense. These were traded in the bustling harbor to Arab and Indian merchants whose dhows had ridden the monsoon winds across the ocean. In return, those ships brought finely glazed Persian pottery, silks from China, and spices from India, goods that filtered back inland, weaving the continent into a global economy. The city's distinct identity is still visible in its architecture. To build in this coastal environment, Mogadishu's artisans turned to the sea itself, quarrying coral stone from the reefs. They cut and shaped this living rock into blocks, which would harden in the sun, creating sturdy, ornate buildings. Elaborate mansions and mosques featured intricately carved geometric designs and inscriptions, a stunning visual testament to the city's sophistication and its deep connection to the Islamic world. For Mogadishu was a pivotal center for the spread of Islam along the East African coast. Its scholars and traders carried the faith southward, integrating it with local traditions to create a distinct Swahili Muslim culture. The city's grand mosques, like the 13th century Fakhr ad-Din, served as centers of learning and community, their minarets standing as silent sentinels over the harbor. This was a place where a merchant could pray in a coral stone mosque at dawn, negotiate for ivory at noon, and by evening watch a dhow being loaded with goods destined for a port in Gujarat or Oman. Mogadishu represents the height of the Swahili city-state, a powerful reminder that Africa was not a passive recipient of foreign trade, but an active, innovative architect of the Indian Ocean world, building its prosperity and its unique culture from the meeting of the deep interior and the boundless sea. The vibrant Swahili world of Mogadishu was one of many regional networks, but one narrow passage would soon become the single most important choke point on the planet. On the western coast of the Malay Peninsula, where the South China Sea meets the Strait of Malacca, a city emerged that would command the very crossroads of global trade. The Sultanate of Malacca, founded around 1400, was not merely a port, it was a brilliant geopolitical invention. Its location was its power, positioned directly on the narrowest part of a vital sea lane. Any ship sailing between the great markets of China and the spice-rich islands of Indonesia had to pass through this strait on its way to India and the Middle East. There was no practical alternative. This made Malacca a mandatory toll booth for half the world's commerce, a place where the monsoon winds from two oceans converged, and so did the wealth of empires. The city became a spectacularly cosmopolitan emporium, a bustling waterworld where languages and goods mixed in a constant hum of activity. On its crowded docks, you would see the towering, multi-decked junks of Ming China, laden with porcelain and silk, moored beside the sleek, lateen-sailed dhows of Arab and Gujarati merchants carrying textiles and incense. The air would be thick with the scent of drying fish, exotic spices, and the tang of salt. To manage this incredible diversity, the sultans of Malacca established a famously efficient and fair administration. They appointed 4 different harbor masters, each responsible for the merchants from a specific quadrant of the world, ensuring disputes were settled quickly and trade flowed smoothly. This pragmatic policy attracted a permanent population of foreign traders who established their own neighborhoods, creating a microcosm of the Indian Ocean world within a single city's walls. From this commercial epicenter, a profound cultural transformation radiated outward. The ruling elite of Malacca embraced Islam, and the port became the primary engine for the spread of the faith throughout maritime Southeast Asia. Muslim merchants and scholars from India and the Arab world made it their base, and through their interactions with local rulers and traders, the religion took root in the Malay archipelago. Malacca's legal code and court rituals blended Islamic principles with local customs, creating a new model of kingship that neighboring states eagerly adopted. The city's wealth was not just in its warehouses, but in its role as a center of religious learning and cultural prestige, proving that a port could trade in faith as readily as it traded in pepper. Such immense prosperity, however, could not go unnoticed by distant powers with ambitions of their own. In 1511, a fleet of Portuguese carracks appeared on the horizon, their cannon a technology utterly foreign to the region. They were not seeking a trading partnership but control. They saw Malacca not as a partner in a network, but as a prize to be seized, the key to monopolizing the spice trade and breaking the Venetian and Arab hold on European markets. The Portuguese conquest was brutal and definitive, shattering the Sultanate and placing the vitals straight under European command for the first time. The fall of Malacca marks a pivotal moment, the opening act in a centuries-long drama where Asian trading empires would face the relentless, armed commerce of Europe. Its story is a powerful lesson in geography and vulnerability, showing how the very strait that created a city's fortune could also make it the ultimate target. The thunder of Portuguese cannon at Malacca echoed eastward toward a far older and more legendary spice market. On the lush Malabar coast of India, where the monsoon rains fed forests of climbing vines, stood the fabled city of spices, Calicut. For centuries before any European knew its name, this port was the epicenter of a fragrance that shaped empires, the source of black pepper. Its reputation was built not on walls or warships, but on a principle so rare it became legendary: the unshakable commercial integrity of its Hindu ruler, the Zamorin. Merchants from across the Indian Ocean knew that in Calicut, contracts were sacred. The Zamorin's officials enforced fair weights and measures, settled disputes impartially, and guaranteed the safety of traders regardless of their origin or faith. This royal guarantee turned the port into a spectacularly cosmopolitan bazaar. Arab dhows crowded the harbor beside enormous Chinese junks, their crews mingling in a market where the air was permanently spiced with the pungent scent of drying peppercorns. Mountains of the precious black grains harvested from the surrounding hills were measured out in warehouses called pandicads, destined for tables from Cairo to Canton. Calicut was not just a port, it was the very heart of the global pepper trade, a place where trust was the currency that moved mountains of spice. This was the world that Vasco da Gama's battered fleet stumbled into in May of 1498. After a horrific voyage around Africa, his men were sick with scurvy, his ships barely seaworthy. Their first sight of Calicut's bustling, orderly waterfront must have seemed like a mirage of civilization. Da Gama had achieved his goal. He had found the sea route to the source of the spices, but his arrival marked the beginning of a fatal misunderstanding. The Portuguese came as conquerors in the mold of their actions at Malacca, armed with a militant Christianity and a desire to monopolize trade by force. The Zamorin, however, treated them as just another group of merchants, to be judged by the same standards of peaceful commerce he extended to Arabs, Hindus, Jews, and Chinese. He granted da Gama an audience and the right to trade, perplexed by the poor quality of the goods the Portuguese had brought, cheap cloth and trinkets utterly unworthy of a spice market. The cultural clash was total. The Portuguese saw the Zamorins' tolerance of Muslim traders as an affront, while the Zamorins saw the Portuguese' disrespect for established custom and their quickness to threaten violence as the behavior of pirates, not honorable merchants. Da Gama's voyage, though a navigational triumph, planted the seeds of immediate conflict. He left Calicut with a hold full of pepper, but also with a simmering resentment. The Portuguese would return not as traders but as attackers. They realized that to control the pepper trade, they did not need to conquer all of India. They only needed to control its choke points, the ports like Calicut from which it flowed. The subsequent decades saw a relentless campaign of naval bombardment, the blockade of Calicut's harbor, and the ruthless targeting of any Arab or Indian ship carrying spices. The goal was to cripple the ancient multilateral network and force all commerce through Portuguese fortified outposts. Calicut, the city built on fairness, found itself on the front lines of a new, violent form of globalization. Its capture became the obsessive goal of Portugal, and soon every other European sea power that followed. The struggle for this one Malabar port signaled a profound and dark turning point. It marked the moment when the interconnected, pluralistic world of the Indian Ocean, governed by complex local rules and mutual interest, began to be forcibly reshaped by the Atlantic powers, whose model was not the free market of Calicut, but the armed monopoly. The scent of pepper would now carry with it the smell of gunpowder, a change that would ultimately rewire the entire world's idea of wealth, power, and connection. The thunder of Portuguese cannon at Malacca echoed a brutal new reality, but centuries earlier, another Indian port had flourished under a very different kind of order. On the lush, river-cut coast of Kerala, a city of legend vanished so completely it was thought to be a myth. Ancient Roman texts and Tamil poetry sang of Muziris, a fabulously wealthy port where ships from Rome arrived, their holds heavy with gold, to exchange it for mountains of black pepper. For generations, scholars searched in vain, its location lost to time, until the soil of a small village named Pattanam began to whisper its secrets. A systematic archaeological excavation there has done something extraordinary. It has pulled a legend from the earth. The layers of soil at Pattanam tell a story of frantic, global exchange. Digging down, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a massive wharf made of teakwood and brick, a waterfront designed to handle the largest of ocean-going vessels. Nearby, they found a brick-lined water tank, likely part of an ancient warehouse complex for storing goods. But the true magic lies in the small finds, the everyday debris of a cosmopolitan port. They unearthed thousands of pottery shards, but these were not all local. There were amphorae from the Mediterranean that once held wine and olive oil for Roman traders living abroad. There were shards of fine tableware from Turkey and the Levant. They found intaglios, small carved gems for signet rings, and Roman glass, all speaking of a community with tastes and connections spanning the known world. The most dramatic discovery, however, was a hauntingly personal one. Preserved in the waterlogged soil was a massive dugout canoe hollowed from a single log. Inside, it was not empty. It was filled to the brim with a cargo that confirmed the ancient text's word for word, a mass of black peppercorns, still waiting to be shipped out after nearly 2,000 years. This single, tangible find transformed Muziris from a poet's dream into a historical fact, a place where the Roman Empire's craving for spice was met shipload by shipload. The port was a bustling microcosm with evidence of Jewish, Arab, and Syrian Christian traders living alongside the local population, a multicultural hub long before the term was coined. And then the evidence stops. The wharf shows signs of a sudden, catastrophic end. Layers of silt and sand suggest a colossal flood, perhaps a tsunami or a dramatic shift in the river's course, buried the active port under meters of mud, choking its harbors and ending its life as a gateway. The silence that followed was so complete that Muziris faded into pure story. Its rediscovery does more than locate a dot on a map. It validates an entire system. It proves the intimate, material reality of the trade that Roman historians described, showing us a world where a sailor from Naples could walk the streets of Kerala, and where a canoe filled with pepper was a tiny link in a chain that stretched all the way to the forums of Rome. Its sudden burial preserved a moment in time, a snapshot of a connected world that was thriving and then was simply gone. The world's horizons stretched not only eastward for spice, but also westward into a realm of fog and legend. At the very end of our journey through 30 ports lies a place that breaks the pattern entirely, a quiet meadow on the northern tip of Newfoundland known as Elance Orcs Meadows. This is not a bustling emporium or a fortified naval base. It is something far more fragile and profound. A few simple sod buildings that mark the farthest known westward reach of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, a Norse foothold in North America established around the year 1000 of the Common Era. The archaeological evidence here is sparse but unmistakable. The foundations of several large hall-like structures have been uncovered, built in the classic Viking style, with walls of turf laid over a timber frame. Among the artifacts are iron nails, a stone oil lamp, a bronze cloak pin, and most tellingly, slag from iron working. This last detail is crucial, as it points not to a temporary camp, but to a base for boat repair and maintenance, a place where the Norse could haul their ships ashore and mend them for the long voyage back to Greenland and Iceland. They called this place Vinland, a land of wild grapes and towering timber, resources that were scarce in their Greenlandic home. The settlement was small, perhaps housing around 100 people at its peak, and it did not last long, likely abandoned within a decade due to the harsh climate and difficult relations with the indigenous peoples they called Skraelings. Yet within that brief window, contact occurred. Among the Norse artifacts, archaeologists have found butternuts, a tree that does not grow in Newfoundland but thrives hundreds of miles to the south, evidence of either exploration or trade networks with local communities. This was not a major commercial hub. No great flow of goods passed through Elance Orcs Meadows. Its significance is entirely different. It stands as a lonely testament to human daring, a proof that the ancient and medieval worlds were even more interconnected than we once believed. The Norse did not find cities of gold or establish a lasting colony, but their voyage irrevocably expanded the map. It showed that the Atlantic was not an impassable barrier, but a challenging highway that could, with incredible skill and luck, be crossed. This single, failed settlement whispers a powerful truth about our story of 30 ports, that the network was never just about the flow of wealth. It was also about the relentless, often fleeting, reach of curiosity. Every so often, a crew would sail past the last known landmark, past the edge of the chart, driven by rumor or necessity, and in doing so, they would stitch another thread, however thin, into the vast and growing tapestry of a connected world. These scattered ports were never truly alone. Each one, from Lothal's engineered dock to Calicut's spice-laden wharves, was a single knot in a vast, invisible net that stretched across oceans and centuries. The real story is not in the individual harbors, but in the patterns of connection that bound them together, transforming isolated landings into a functioning global system. This system operated on a set of unspoken rules, a kind of ancient playbook for building a gateway to the world. The first rule was always location, location, location. Successful ports emerged at nature's predetermined crossroads. They hugged the narrow straits like Malacca, where geography funneled all traffic through a single, controllable point. They grew at the mouths of great rivers like Barbaricon on the Indus or Ostia on the Tiber, where they could tap into the trade of a continent's interior. They were placed where the deep sea met a protected bay, offering sailors a refuge from the open ocean's fury. This was not luck, it was a deliberate reading of the Earth's own map. The second rule was investment. Recognizing a good spot was only the beginning. Civilizations then poured staggering resources into bending that geography to their will. They built the hard architecture of connection. At Caesarea Maritima, King Herod constructed a massive breakwater of concrete blocks in the open sea to create a safe harbor. At Kition, the Phoenicians built roofed ship sheds to protect their fleet. From Alexandria's lighthouse to Leptis Magna's dredged basin, these were monumental public works, state-funded declarations that commerce was worth the cost. On shore, the soft infrastructure was just as vital. Warehouses like those at Ostia, customs offices like the Superintendent of Maritime Trade in Guangzhou, and legal frameworks like the Rhodian Sea Law were all designed to manage the flow of goods, people, and money, to turn chaotic arrival into orderly, taxable exchange. This brought people, and with them the third rule, cosmopolitanism. A great port was a magnet for the world. It attracted not just goods, but the people who knew their value. Communities of foreign merchants settled in, building temples to their own gods, speaking their own languages, and living in distinct quarters, from the Arab funduks of Guangzhou to the Italian agora on Delos. This diversity was not merely tolerated, it was often legally protected, because a ruler knew that a Gujarati ship captain or a Jewish banker brought unique knowledge and connections that made the port richer for everyone. The bustling waterfront was a living lexicon of cultures, a place where a new hybrid identity like Swahili could be born from the daily necessity of trade. But none of this would have been possible without the silent, global partner that made the system hum, the wind. In the Mediterranean, predictable seasonal winds like the Etesians allowed for a reliable sailing calendar. Ship captains could plan voyages knowing when conditions would be favorable for a journey from Rome to Alexandria or from Athens to the Black Sea. This predictability allowed for the scheduling of entire grain fleets and the intricate diplomacy of empires. In the Indian Ocean, the system was even more powerful and precise. The monsoon winds were not just a convenience, they were the engine of globalization. For 6 months of the year, the wind blew steadily from the southwest, pushing ships from the Arabian Peninsula directly to the coasts of India and beyond. Then, as if on a celestial timer, it reversed, blowing from the northeast for the other 6 months, carrying those same ships home. This incredible reliability turned the Indian Ocean into a maritime highway with a built-in schedule. A merchant in Oman could load his dhow with incense in January, catch the northeast monsoon to India, trade for pepper, and ride the southwest monsoon back home by late summer, all with a confidence that shaped entire economies. These wind patterns were the ultimate enabling technology, a natural metronome that set the rhythm for half the world's trade, synchronizing the movements of Chinese junks, Arab dhows, and Indian vessels in a grand annual dance. The ports were the dance halls, but the wind called the tune. The wind called the tune, and the ports built the stage, but the true legacy of these networks is what traveled upon them. Far more than silk and silver, these sea lanes carried the very ideas that would shape civilizations. Religions did not spread by decree alone, they sailed on merchant ships. Buddhism traveled from India to Southeast Asia and China aboard vessels docking at ports like Guangzhou. Early Christianity found its way to Kerala in India and Axum in Africa through traders long before official missionaries arrived. Islam reached the Swahili coast and the Malay archipelago not through conquest, but through the peaceful, persistent presence of Muslim merchants in ports from Mogadishu to Malacca. whose faith and fair dealing made a powerful impression on local rulers. These were conversions of connection, not coercion, born from daily interaction on crowded wharves. Technology, too, was a passenger on every voyage. The astrolabe, perfected by Islamic scholars, navigated its way to Europe via Mediterranean ports. The lateen sail, which allowed ships to tack against the wind, migrated from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, revolutionizing European ship design. The Chinese inventions of the magnetic compass, sternpost rudder, and watertight bulkhead slowly diffused westward, transforming what ships could do and how far they could safely go. Even something as fundamental as our diet was reshaped in these harbors. Citrus fruits from Southeast Asia, sugar cane from India, and mangoes all traveled along these routes, introduced to new continents where they would forever change agriculture and cuisine. A Roman in Ostia might never see an orange, but a merchant in Quanju could enjoy one, thanks to the ships that linked their worlds. This ancient system possessed a defining character starkly different from what followed. It was polycentric, a web with no single permanent controller. Power shifted from the Phoenicians to the Greeks, the Romans, the Indians, the Axumites, and the Chinese, with multiple hubs like Alexandria, Barbaricon, and Guangzhou operating simultaneously. It was fundamentally multi-civilizational, built on a rough parity. A Roman trader in Muziris or an Arab merchant in Guangzhou had to adapt to local laws and customs. They were guests, not masters. Commerce was based on negotiation and mutual benefit, however unequal it might have been at times. This stands in sharp contrast to the colonial model that erupted after the Portuguese bombardment of Calicut. That later system was centralized, imposed by force, and designed for extraction, replacing a network of many nodes with a hierarchy radiating from European capitals. So what does this tapestry of 30 ports ultimately tell us? It reveals that globalization is not a modern invention born of satellites and jet engines. It is a deep, recurring pattern in human history, a rhythm as old as civilization itself. It is driven by two timeless human urges: the curiosity to see what lies beyond the horizon, and the practical need to trade for what you cannot make yourself. These ports were the ancient engines of that process. They were the places where curiosity met commerce, where the unknown became familiar, and where the world, piece by piece, was woven together. Their stones may be silent now, but the world they helped create echoes in every container ship that crosses the Suez Canal, in every spice jar on a supermarket shelf, and in the very interconnected reality we take for granted today. The story of these harbors is, in the end, the story of us learning to reach out, connect, and in doing so, slowly build one world from many. The journey across these 30 ports is a map of a world we have forgotten, a world already global. From the engineered dock at Lothal to the wind-swept outpost at Elan's Ox Meadows, each harbor was a crucible where necessity sparked innovation and difference sparked fusion. They were not just points on a coastline, they were the birthplaces of hybrid languages, the laboratories for new laws, and the galleries where artistic styles blended under the tropical sun or the Mediterranean sky. This ancient network proves a profound truth. Distant civilizations were intimately connected, trading not just goods but the very blueprints for art, faith, and science, long before we ever coined the term globalization. The real treasure shipped in those wooden hulls was never just the pepper or the silk. It was the quiet, relentless exchange of ideas that slowly, over centuries, wove separate threads of human experience into a shared story. So the next time you see a container ship on the horizon or taste a spice from a distant continent, remember that this impulse to reach out, to trade, and to connect is one of humanity's oldest stories. It is a story written not in scrolls, but in stone foundations beneath harbors, in shards of pottery scattered across oceans, and in the very languages we speak today. We would love to hear which part of this vast, ancient web captures your imagination the most. Was it the monsoon-driven voyages between Rome and India, the cosmopolitan miracle of Kwanju, or the lonely Norse settlement at the edge of the world? Let us know in the comments below what ancient trade route or forgotten port you find most fascinating.